Who are the best young players in the world? The long list for the Golden Boy Award has just been released, so we're going to talk through our top 5 picks for under 21 players, excluding those who have already won the award, because it's more fun that way. As always, I'm joined by JJ Bull.
Hi.
And Jon Mackenzie.
Hello.
Who are going to take us through their picks and, of course, what makes them so special. So we'll start at the bottom of the list. In 5th place, JJ, tell me who you've chosen.
Pau Cubarsí is one of my favourite young players in the entire world. He is a defender who is 17 years old. He has 3 caps for Spain already. He's amazing. But it's not because he's some incredible destroyer of strikers, although maybe he will be, we don't know. He's amazing at passing the ball. Here are some of his passes, which is not particularly interesting to look at. He plays lots of passes. What is interesting is the kinds of passes that he plays. This is why he's so good. Now, a lot of these passes you'll see are quite long. This is one game he played against Napoli in the Champions League last season. He got roped into the Barcelona team, I think because of injuries mostly, but also because he's just so good, you can't really stop him.
Is this a pass or is this a shot? This one looks like a shot to me.
Well,
from his own corner flag, no less.
Yes, he's very good at shooting.
Oh no, it comes from the middle.
It definitely is a pass, yeah. These are all passes, all big long passes. But the point of these passes are he's not like just knocking it along over the top of people. He's breaking lines, so he's turning defence into attack, and he sees passes that you cannot see while watching a game. This is the thing, some players you'll see and they can play a pass, you're like, I didn't even notice that was happening while watching it. Here's an example of that for me. This is him playing against a team that no one knows who they are. So this is Cubarsí over here, he's receiving the ball. Now my point being, this player here is who is going to get the ball. This is Andreas Christensen. So you can see here, Cubarsí, the most normal people would play the ball out to this wide player here, or take a touch, go back to the goalkeeper, which would encourage the opposition to push up on you, and then probably going to have to play it long or be really good to play through a press. But Cubarsí likes to manipulate what the forward press is doing or the striker against him, lure them in, and you can find these passes. The ball's going to go through this area where a player is in the way of. And what he manages to do is he draws them towards it, fires it through, and this pass then goes past all these opposition players to find the midfielder. So straight away, Barcelona are going from defence to attack in an instant, and that's him receiving the ball here, meaning that they have left this many players behind the ball. So you turned instantly, all those players were there. Now you're suddenly on the attack, you've got loads of players forward, so you can go at them and create things. And it's very rare to have that in a player who is 17 or a centre-back. This is the keys, like he's got things that other players don't. And if we look, this is a graphic from a few years ago, from 2021 actually, in The Athletic. But see, the players tend to peak at different ages according to how often they play. This is just in the Premier League. And the reason no goalkeepers have won the Golden Boy Award so far is, I assume, because they don't play when they're young enough. They're just not ready. It's a lot about what your experience, I guess, and what you know. Centre-backs aren't far off that. So you tend to peak later as a centre-back, probably because you have the physical attributes. But if you're good enough with the ball, you can get in the team. And so Cubarsí's not even on the 18 years old list, he's 17, and yet he's already looking like, well, he's a Spain international, he's already there. And that's why he's my first pick.
And even the screenshots there, even the advertising board was calling him a star. Jon, you've also chosen a defender who, shock horror, plays for Manchester City.
Yeah, I maybe betraying my tactical love here, but a lot of the players that I've been drawn towards in selecting this list are players who have a big impact on the teams that they're playing for in the tactical sense, even at a really young age. So I've gone for Rico Lewis at Manchester City because Rico Lewis is, I think, fundamental to the way that Man City are playing this season so far. Not just because he is doing the usual thing that we expect from a fullback for Pep Guardiola and inverting. So that means that he's moving into this pivot position alongside Rodri. That means he's going to have to do a lot of back to goal stuff, intricate build-up stuff, sensible build-up stuff. But he's also not just forming this box midfield, but they can also form a triangle at times as well. We've seen Kevin De Bruyne dropping out into wide areas and being creative there, which has, I think, added an element to City's game. When that happens, obviously Lewis is moving into more of an 8 slot, really. That means in certain phases of the game, he's going to be pushing right up into the final line, doing a lot of ball carrying stuff, wide build-up, high build-up. But he's also a fullback at the end of the day, so he's defending in that fullback area. But sometimes there will be scenarios where he's having to do that wide build-up as well. So we're talking about a player now who's playing in every different phase, every different line of Manchester City's play. He's 19 years old. It's an incredible amount of responsibility and an incredible amount of experience to have to be able to play in that way. Obviously, he's been cultured in some kind of lab at Manchester City's academy, so he's been playing this way his whole career. But I mean, we've just talked about Pau Cubarsí and goalkeepers not being the winners of these kinds of awards very often. I think in part that's because experience is super important when you're playing in that back line, because if you make a mistake, it will translate into goals conceded. So the very fact that you can have such a young player who's fundamental to every different phase of play, also structurally very important for City, because he can play, as we've said, in that box, in that diamond as well. I just think that we may start seeing some of these younger players who are really just tactically flexible coming through in these lists as well. So I'm really impressed by Rico Lewis, and so that's why I've thrown him in here.
Rewarded with a start for England recently as well. He is very short though. Is that going to limit him at all, or do you think he's got the other attributes to make up for that?
Yeah, I think physicality is an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think we think now of physicality being just everyone has to be over 6 foot in order to compete in the Premier League. But I think Rico Lewis is interesting because he uses his physicality in a very different way. Very often seems as though he's going to get into trouble. I guess you see that from Rodri as well a little bit, but it seems like, they're definitely going to lose the ball here, but somehow they either come out the other side or they manage to pass the ball off. He's showing what you can do with a smaller body, even in these top level games.
Okay, and now moving on to number 4 in the list. You've both picked Real Madrid players, and we're going to start with JJ's pick, which is?
Arda Güler of Turkey. He's a lovely player. Now, Real Madrid tend to look like this at the moment, a kind of 4-3-3 with Mbappe and Vinicius Jr., but Güler is one of these players they've signed. They've signed all these amazing young players. How do they get in the team? You've got to be pretty good to knock Valverde out of this team. You've got to be really good to knock Rodrigo out of the team. And that's kind of the positions where he could play. So Güler can play as a 10 or an attacking 8. He can play off the right. He's left-footed. You get all the cliche comparisons to someone like Lionel Messi because he's left-footed and really dribbly. But Güler, I think, will probably end up as an advanced kind of playmaker around this area here, this sort of position. This is where he'll be. And the reason I like Güler so much comes from, I was on Twitter the other day, as often I am, and I saw a tweet, and I can't remember who did it, but they were talking about how there are difference makers in football. So we think of a game is locked at 0-0. Lionel Messi can open up and win you a game out of nowhere because he can do lots of different things. But there are individual players who have specialist traits that can unlock a game in one go. And I can't remember the divisions that they had, but I've tried to rename them from memory. The first one is set piece champs. So someone like James Ward-Prowse or Juninho Pernambucano can win you a game out of nowhere with a set piece. Dribble kings like Iniesta or Eden Hazard can dribble into tight spaces that you would never normally think someone could possibly do that. Nerd deniers. So XG says you should not shoot from long range. And yet if you do from outside the box, someone like Phil Foden or even Marcus Rashford, you can ping one in from outside the box. That can open up a game for you when it's locked down. Triangle boys. So players who see things you cannot see. Players like Modric, Ozil can thread a pass through a triangle through ball, through lines. Sonic the Hedgehog's, something about transition. It's like Adama Traore. So he's not a fantastic footballer, but you can turn a game in an instant because you can give him the ball and he runs all the way up the pitch. You can turn things, like Gareth Bale's a good example of that. You give him the ball deep, goes past players, opens things up. And clinical finishers, so like Haaland and Kane, people who beat the XG consistently, real clinical players. And Güler is kind of 3 of these. I think he's a bit of a dribble king. He can go in tight spaces and open things up that way. You've seen him as a set-piece champ. He's also definitely a triangle boy. So he can score goals from long range. You saw in the Euros, he scored a long-range goal for Turkey that just opened up the game. He can do these things. So when you're tight in a game, you don't have these players always that are around. Güler is one of them. And then being that young and being able to decide matches on your own it's basically crazy. Having the mentality or the confidence to take on a shot from long range when you're that young consistently is very, very
and shouldering that responsibility for Turkey as well shows a lot for a player of his age, right?
Yeah, he's like a future captain. He's just one of the... He's really, really fun to watch. I really love watching Güler play when he's there.
And your point about whether he'll get enough minutes to fully develop into the player that he can, I suppose being left-footed and preferring to play on the right side of the pitch might count in his favour looking at that squad.
Maybe. It depends how Ancelotti or whoever comes in next uses him, because you've got Bellingham who plays in the 10 mostly of the attack, but Bellingham also wants to get forward. He's going to be most of a squad player and used now and again. Ancelotti's rotated quite a lot this season already. But that question as to how many minutes you'll get and how you can develop, like you need to develop on the training ground as well. If you're around the best players in the world, you'll get much better in theory. But that also applies to another young player at Real Madrid.
Yeah, I've gone for Endrick, maybe a little bit ahead of schedule here, and it's almost as though I've tried to shoehorn someone in so we can talk about Real Madrid's youth development. But Endrick is interesting from that perspective as well, right? Because one of the things we've seen Real Madrid doing, very different to La Masia, so someone like Pau Kubasi coming through at La Masia and being, same with Rico Lewis, being developed to play that kind of play style. What we're seeing from Real Madrid is because they are quite talent dependent, so they give their players a huge amount of freedom. They're picking up players later on in their development, bringing them through into their team, often from places like South America. So we've seen Vinicius Jr., Fede Valverde, Rodrigo as well coming through, not being thrown straight onto the pitch, but being brought up in and around like a really world-class squad and being able to develop in that way, and obviously that pathway is working out quite well. We could talk about Camavinga, Tchouaméni as well. Those are players who were bought fairly early on in their careers out of Ligue 1, and rather than just being thrown straight in at the deep end, they're able to develop under players like Kroos and Modric, and we're seeing those guys come through now. So Endrick is one of those kind of players. They bought him from Palmeiras, spent a lot of money on him, kept him at Palmeiras, and he came through the youth system there, and yeah, really impressive goal scoring numbers for them. So I think in 170 games scores 167 goals, which is like a mad rate of return.
Youth levels?
Youth levels, yeah. So then, So that's the caveat. And then it steps up into the senior level, and he's scoring much less than that. And the big question is going to be, can he be a high volume goal scorer? Playing against defences at the highest level in the Champions League in Europe. But I think a fascinating player, again, from a tactical point of view, because we talked about that front three already. You've got Vinicius Jr., you've got some of the best players in the world in that front line, but they all have a tendency to want to play in this sort of left-hand side of the field. Now, you can argue that that's an issue if you're positionally minded, but I think with Ancelotti, what he likes to do, as we said, is give his players freedom to be able to, solve problems using their talent. So I think that's not necessarily an issue, but there may be certain situations where you want to have someone actually operating as a classic number 9 to create space, to move players away, so that these players with a left-sided tendency can have more room to manoeuvre in. Last season, they were using Bellingham out of a 4-4-2 diamond, stepping up and crashing into the box and providing that. But they're using Bellingham slightly deeper now because they've changed the way that they're setting up. Endrick then becomes quite interesting because we're seeing him coming on late in games and playing as a sort of out-and-out centre forward. So
That's how they used Joselu quite a lot last season.
Yeah, right. So it could be the case that he does become quite important for this team if they feel the need to have someone who can almost play off the last line. And he is a very good finisher of the ball. Playing for a team like Real Madrid, they will generate chances for him. And so I'm kind of interested to see how he develops and whether or not he can become a high volume goal scorer for them. Will he be someone in that same conversation as the elite finishers that you had in your buckets in the last slide? So yeah, Endrick may be a little bit ahead of schedule to be in this list, but I think he's one of the really interesting ones to have out there, especially because there's not a huge amount of number 9s that we're talking about coming through. So yeah, I'm kind of fascinated to see how he
it will be interesting to see how he develops, like you say, with those other players in the squad, and whether they have to move him around, or how his role changes maybe from the bench. But as you say, very, very young, just turned 18, right?
Yeah,
so
that's right.
He's got plenty of time. Moving on to our number 3 picks. JJ, you've gone for the latest on a long list of Benfica products.
Yes, I've chosen João Neves, who I really like, an all-round action midfielder from Benfica to PSG. He could have gone anywhere in the world probably in the summer. You see from his Peachy chart here, what he does is lots of everything. He carries the ball a lot, he makes lots of recoveries, defends intensely, kind of a ball winner in midfield who is good with the ball, which is very, very valuable when you're trying to mix a midfield 3, I guess. You want someone who sits, someone who wins the ball, and someone who goes forward. And Neves kind of effortlessly goes in between all sort of 3 of those categories. Then you've got him here as an all-action midfielder on and off the ball. He's the most all-action midfielder, arguably, of the Premier League last season. And he's very young. So the fact that he's doing this now, again, you see when players peak, he's already doing things that he probably shouldn't be doing. And I think Ligue 1 at PSG is probably a good league to develop at, because the talent differentiation between PSG and most other teams in that league is such that he's got a bit more room than going somewhere really competitive where you might get lost a little bit. But he's already making a name for himself there. He's played the 3rd most progressive passes of any player for PSG this season. And he's got 4 assists in 4 games, which makes it sound like he's some sort of creative genius. You put him in the Triangle Boys, but I'm going to show you a little something I find quite funny about assists and just generally how you mark statistics.
At one point, he even had 4 assists in 2 games, didn't he? Because they came in the first 2 games of the season.
Well, that's correct. And one of them is this. So here is João Neves. So he's going to assist a goal here by playing the ball wide, Bradley Barcola on the wing, who then dribbles past 5 players and buries into the back corner. So that is a assist for João Neves. just a little thing I thought you'd enjoy. But what is good is that Benfica have produced another wonder kid. They keep producing incredible players from their academy. They do it consistently. There's maybe a trick to it. There's an article in The Athletic where Stu James went and spent some time with the coaches there, and they looked at how they actually develop all these players. It's really, really interesting. But like, they've got more coming through now. Of the last, since 2019-20, they've sold João Neves, Gonçalo Ramos, Gonçalo Guedes, Jota, Ruben Dias, João Felix, all for huge amounts of money, which is part of their model. They also bring in lots of players, especially from South America, I guess, because Brazilians can go because they speak Portuguese, so that helps a lot.
Stepping stone league, isn't it?
So you adjust to Europe as a young boy, unless you're Endrick and go straight to Real Madrid, and then you can get sold on for some money. But they've got more players coming through now. Like Antonio Silva will be a huge money player going. He could have been in this list actually, Antonio Silva, one of the rare defenders to have made it in.
Did a centre-back who starts for Portugal.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. João Rego, Hugo Felix, brother of João, Marcelo Moreira, João Veloso. These are all wonder kids in Benfica B, I think, are just coming through the ranks now, who'll probably be on a list similar to this at some point soon. You can see, according to CIES, they estimate the value of Benfica's youth academy to be the most in the entire world, because they produce so many players they sell for huge amounts of money. It's very, very interesting.
Thinking all the way back to David Luiz, Ramirez, Di Maria as well. They've got one of those academies that is like, if they never sold these players, those 11s that...
Yeah, but then that's part of their model, right?
Yeah, of course, yeah. They have to go. And John, you've also picked a dribbly boy in your number 3 pick. Tell me who and why.
I have. It's a name that will be familiar to a lot of people because he had a fairly good Euros. So I've gone for Jamal Musiala of Bayern Munich. Again... You know, everyone knows Musiala. You know what to expect from him. Really creative player, to sort of linchpin in that Bayern central area where he can generate things from nothing. But I think what's so interesting about him again is that he's having an influence on the tactical setup of his team this season. So Vincent Kompany at Bayern this season, and one of the things that I've noticed is that they actually use Musiala again in lots of different phases of play. So we've got another young player who's helping out this time in the build-up phase. So dropping in to help his team to build through the first few phases, get the ball down the field, which is not what you expect from someone like Musiala. Now, the reason you do that is because Musiala is really excellent at receiving the ball back to goal and turning and moving through lines of pressure in that way. I guess there are problems maybe associated with this because, Musiala, you want him to be up the field near the goal so that when you progress the ball, he's in a good situation to maybe do something with it. The way that Bayern get around this is that they have these sort of rotations. So they play Rafael Guerreiro, for example, at left back. If Musiala drops in, often you'll see Guerreiro moving up to the field to sort of replace him in the space that he's vacated, and you'll see Pavlovic, whoever's playing on this side in the pivot, dropping out to fill that space as well. So nominally, they're sort of finding ways of solving that kind of problem. But I still think that there are questions about when you're moving a player as talented as Musiala away from the more dangerous areas, especially in build-up. And it's not just that he's dropping in as a pivot. Sometimes there's a game against Wolfsburg, I think, where they were in this sort of situation in build-up and Musiala was right next to the goalkeeper picking the ball up here. So yeah, again, raises interesting tactical questions, but it does indicate just how important that Musiala is for Bayern Munich under Vincent Kompany. So yeah, another one to look out for. It feels like he's been around forever, right? It's like some of these players that we're mentioning, it seems mad that they're still under the age of 22, I suppose, technically. But I think he's one for me who's really stood out in the last few seasons, and I think he'll be fundamental to Bayern's season this time around. I expect to see him getting a lot of assists and a lot of goals and some of those really lovely dribbles that he does in tight spaces.
An incredible amount of responsibility to have doing all of those phases, at that age.
Yeah, again, we've talked about how often when we're talking about young, impressive players, often in the past it's been like, they do, nearly lost my pen. Often they do these like exciting dribbles, they score really nice goals. And they're almost sort of periphery players in terms of the tactics, because you want, usually your more experienced players to do the stuff that makes things tick, but we're seeing more and more of these players coming through now and becoming fundamental from a tactical point of view. Yeah, absolutely. Now, before we move on to the last 2 picks on each list, let's hear from our newsletter king, Phil Hay, who's got an interesting Arsenal story for us.
Come join us inside Mikel Arteta's matrix at Arsenal. He's a deep thinker, Arteta, and you must have read the story about him hiring professional pickpockets to temporarily rob his squad, purely to remind them of the importance of staying alert at all times. Well, The Athletic's Jordan Campbell has found out a bit more about these techniques by speaking to a former colleague of Arteta's. Did you know that Arteta introduced a dog, a Labrador, to Arsenal's training ground? She's called Win, naturally. Arteta uses Formula 1 imagery to make sure that his data presentation lands. And anytime they go after a signing, the pitches tend to include those players' favourite music, just to make them feel at home. You get all this detail in the Athletic FC newsletter, which you can sign up to now. It's all the big stories and all the weird and wonderful stuff straight to your inbox Monday to Friday.
Mikel Arteta being Mikel Arteta. Now, if you want more of that, subscribe to the newsletter via the link in the description. Now we're down to the last 2 players on each list, so you've both picked the same player for number 2, which is Bayer Leverkusen's Florian Wirtz. JJ, tell me why he's so good.
He is a chance-creating menace from outside the box, as it says here. Not my words, the words of the Athletic. He's really good. Wirtz is obviously amazing. Was outstanding for Germany in the Euros. He is a beautiful player to watch. I'm not sure which of the boxes in my strange buckets he'd have. He's definitely a through ball, a triangle boy, probably a bit dribbly. I think he just does things you can't see. He's one of those. He does things you can't really see. But his production is phenomenal as well. Like, he has output from it. A lot of players kind of drift in and out of these spaces and don't actually have output. Whereas I think Wirtz does, which is why he then so tactically important, especially for what Xabi Alonso does with him, I suppose.
Yeah, I think he's like a supremely intelligent player as well, and I think sometimes it's hard to distinguish those from the supremely talented players as well, but he just knows where to be, sees space, knows how to find space, knows how to manipulate opponents so that he can get into space that they can't get into, and he's really fun to watch from that point of view.
Yeah, one of the most impressive things that I see about him on the rare occasions that I watch him is the balance and the way he can kind of slime out of seemingly dangerous scenarios. Right?
To slime out?
Yeah, slither? What's the right verb there?
I like it. Slime
he worms his way out of dangerous-looking scenarios, right, when he's under pressure.
Yeah, but as JJ says, he's also really important to the way that Xabi Alonso wants Leverkusen to play, because they have a very different play style. I would say they still use positional principles. So what I mean by that is that Alonso is getting his players to use their positions to be able to manipulate the opponent, but he does it in a very different way to the sort of high priest of positional play, which is Pep Guardiola. I mean, people think that Pep Guardiola's play style is quite boring because often they'll play, it's very risk averse, right? So they'll play very safe passes, they'll squeeze the opponent into their own box, which means that they won't try and play any risky passes a lot of the time into central spaces. What we see with Leverkusen is very different because I think he almost flips that on its head and he almost wants to do quite a lot of risky passing. And a lot of the time it looks as though there's no positional advantage being benefited from it. So I've got a couple of sequences I just want to show you here from a game against Mainz from last season. So this is Granit Xhaka on the ball here. Here's Florian Wirtz. What we're going to see is Xhaka playing the ball to Wirtz. Now this doesn't seem like you're getting a huge amount of advantage from a positional point of view because obviously there's 3 players around him here. They're all sort of moving towards him. They're going to close it down. It's going to make it hard for him to do anything. And in the event, that's what happens. The pass comes in and all he can do is just bounce it straight back outside of the block, goes to Robert Andrich over here. But actually, the interesting thing for me is that what he's doing here is you're getting the positional advantage by destabilising the opposition's shape. So you can see here now we've got 5 Mainz players basically in a line, which means that there's space in wide areas, which immediately Leverkusen can start squeezing. So you've now got this situation where the fullback is between 2 players. Who does he go to? You've got Wirtz making the run in behind, creating space in here. So just by playing a pass that maybe if you're watching Pep Guardiola, you kind of think, well, that's a meaningless pass. What's it doing there? Actually, they've opened up the pitch to be able to generate these sorts of benefits.
Does he use different players in that same position when Wirtz is not there? Or is it because of his skill set that he can do these particular things?
But I think with Wirtz, what you have is the ability to do a lot of this small space stuff, which is very risky and make it much less risky, right? Yeah. So the idea then is, I suppose, that you're more comfortable doing that because you're not going to lose the ball more often than not and then have these counter-attacks coming in. I've got another example here, and again, like Wirtz isn't really involved in this, but Wirtz is over in this area here. But what we have again is Granit Xhaka here. This is Edmund Tapsoba, and what's going to happen is you're going to see like another bounce pass here, which just seems pointless. Like, what's the point of just passing it here? And it almost feels as though you're giving the opportunity, the chance to close you down, make life harder for you. That pass comes in, and what it does is it does pull those 2 midfielders up. It creates this space now in between the lines, and this is a Mainz team in a defensive orientation. Usually you would have like lots of compaction, but that bounce pass then creates the space which Jonas Hoffman here can find, and then Tapsoba can play that pass through the lines. It's a risky pass, but actually when they receive the ball then, they're now in this situation where they've got, again, as JJ was showing before, they've got in behind the whole front unit of an opponent's pressing structure. And then you've got, we've got Frimpong out here in the wide area, you've got Wirtz here as well, you've got the striker making the run through as well. And so what they're doing is they're destabilising, they're using positional advantages, but in a very different way. It's small spaces, it's not using width in quite the same way that you might see from someone like Guardiola. But it's very dangerous, and the reason they can do that is because they have players like Wirtz, who is good in those small spaces.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think he's like a nailed-on Man City player in the future. If it goes to play under Guardiola, where you can maybe, like, he doesn't have players maybe who take those risks. Maybe De Bruyne is the only one really that does that at the moment, and so then you get the advantages of those through balls fired through. But unless you have the technical players who are allowed to do that or know when to take the risk at the right time, like Wirtz does, you can't really do it. Musiala is similar. I say Wirtz is slightly more. I prefer him at opening up places. I should have had Musiala in my list. I don't know why I didn't.
He's quite Phil Foden-y, I guess.
Yeah.
So the same kind of thing. And look, I think that Pep Guardiola may move towards some of these more central, like small space build-up ideas. I think we saw it a little bit last season, but I think with Guardiola, he's always going to have that like risk aversion where he's going to be like, it's more important for us to keep the ball for long stretches, because if we're doing that, we're not allowing the opponents to counter-attack on us. So it worked obviously really well for Leverkusen last season, but it'd be interesting to see whether or not more coaches in that sort of positional bent or that position bent are going to start using some of these ideas a bit more.
And one of the most impressive things about him and Musiala, who we spoke about earlier, just kind of off the top of my head, is that in the German national team, their form in those positions influenced how the national team played, right, and essentially displaced the more natural wingers like Gnabry and Zane, and so they got relegated to the bench so that these guys could do their thing. Which
could be a problem eventually when you have your best players who are both interior and you need to have width, but then you have to drop players. A bit like having Frank Lampard and Steven Gerrard in the same team.
Or Foden and Bellingham and Palmer and Saka.
And their left back.
Yeah, and their left back. Although Rico Lewis. Okay, now, the moment you've all been waiting for. Number one, the best young player in the world. Who could it possibly be?
You mean Yamal?
It's Lamine Yamal, who is the best young player. Maybe the best player in the entire world at the moment. It's a bit early. He's just 17. He's 17. Now, if you remember my stupid button boxes I had earlier for players that I was trying to remember off of a tweet I saw once. So Yamal is, Goulet is like 3 of them, and some of these players are like 2 or 3 of those kind of buckets. Yamal is maybe all of them, except set-piece champ. He is a dribble king, nerd denier, triangle boy, who is a Sonic the Hedgehog clinical finisher. He's got absolutely everything that you want of a single player, and he's 17.
And he's got braces as well.
It's not normal to be this good at any age. The other thing he's added to his game recently is how well he works, rather than how hard he works, how well he works out of possession. So he's added lots of recoveries and interceptions. I think there was a goal he scored the other day that was part of it.
Yeah, they played against Girona, and the first goal in that game was Yamal tracking back to dispossess the David Lopez, the centre-back, and winning the ball and then scoring from it. So yeah, obviously Hansi Flick's Barcelona are going to be quite counter-pressy, so to have a player who you can do all the creative stuff and then be like, yeah, he's going to be fine.
Because it's easy to be that good and then sort of stay up front and not do the work. Yeah. But then it's part of the ethic that you want. So you've got that work ethic in them. And the thing is, when he does run with the ball, and because he can go outside or inside of different players, you need the output as well. You can't just be someone who runs and dribbles and draws defenders out. You have to be able to do the output. And you can see like his attacking carries for Barcelona last season, they all have output. They all lead to shots or goals. It's a crazy amount of productivity he has. And in terms of how productive he actually is, in terms of the best players in the world, in the top 5 leagues, he has the second most goal-creating actions of any player already so far this season. He's got 7 goals, so 3 goals, 4 assists. Only Haaland has more than him. You obviously know how good he is, but he's amongst the very best. Like statistically, he's amongst the very best in the world already. Again, he's 17, and if we move on to it, we know he's important to Barcelona not only from the output, but also he's received the second most progressive passes of any player in the top 5 leagues, which to me shows, you can argue how this works, but they're always going to him. He's always ready to receive it high up the pitch. He gets them forward, he gets them out of trouble. He then creates with the ball. And the thing I like particularly about Yamal is that some of the best players in the world have like a catchphrase. They have their own little, what's the word for it?
Trademark.
Like a trademark move. Yeah. So Iron Robin has he's always going to go left, but he still goes left. Stanley Matthews used to have one. Who's got one? Ronaldinho has a flip-flap, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Now, Yamal has this pass or cross that he plays constantly. I think of it as a very Barcelona kind of pass. When you think of the players that Guardiola had and how they would link play around the box and then they'd put the ball to the back post. And Yamal's constant pass that he always plays is this kind of bent cross, and it's every single time he plays it into a dangerous area. He sees things other players don't. He puts it into positions where there are loads of defenders. There'll be loads of defenders in a line defending this, and he'll still find the player who's made this run, or he'll be able to bend it into this sort of area here where someone's making a run into it. His quality of delivery, his technical skill is unbelievable. The vision to see it and the execution and the confidence to play them makes him stand out like from any other player. And he's keeping so many other players out of different teams. Like he's got 3 caps for the Spanish national, 16 caps for the Spanish national team. He's already won La Liga. He's also won Euro 2024. He's 17. Here's the exact example of this board. Here he is, pin his trademark. You'll see them do this 1,000 times and they'll cross it in here. Or the same sort of starting position they did against France in the Euros. If you don't close him down, well, you're going to say, John, earlier, like it constantly brings players out to mark him, right?
Yeah. I mean, what's so dangerous about players like Yamal, especially when you're an elite team, so often you'll be playing against packed boxes and low-lying defences, is you want a winger who can go either way. So he has the threat of going down the line, also the threat of coming inside.
Can use his right foot
Can
as well.
use right foot just much, yeah. So he's a genuine two-way winger. When you do that, what you'll see is a lot of teams doubling up on that player because you've got to make sure you cover both options. And in that situation, as we can see here, what ends up happening is he just plays a ball to the back post anyway, and the goal is scored. So he just has so many options of how to cause teams problems.
Especially in transition, right? Because then you're going to think we need to double mark him if he's there. So if you're just trying to get back into defensive shape, you leave a bit of space open. Someone's got to watch the middle of the pitch, someone's got to watch them for going wide. But if you have runners going next to you, it's going to drag defensive shapes all over the place. And then, as we saw against France in the Euros, he'll just bend one in from 30 yards because he is, I can't remember what the phrase was for the shooty boy, but he can shoot from 30 yards and put it in the corner. He's unbelievably good.
To have that unpredictability and like being able to use both feet at this age is testament to his talent, but also the coaching as well, right?
He does have some tactical freedom as well in both setups. So if you think of like Riyad Mahrez, for example, at Man City, he's a slightly different player to what he was at Leicester, with a bit more freedom to do things he wanted to. Where Yamal, lots of freedom under De La Fuente at Spain, so he's allowed to do what he kind of wants to do. At Barcelona, kind of similar. It's not hugely rigid stuff he's been told to do. He's not been Grealished yet, really. And I wonder if age does factor into some of this, because you play with a certain freedom in your youth. And you can see that, again, this is from an earlier Athletic article, but when you're young, you're more keen to take anyone on. You've got confidence, you have the physical
explosiveness,
acceleration,
right?
speed, yeah. I think a lot of it's mental. You're confident, you know you can go past people, you haven't been stopped before. Once you get stopped a couple of times, you start thinking, maybe I'll play defensive mid now, like
especially for wingers who get fouled a lot. Like I think you saw it anecdotally, like I don't have the data, but in Neymar's career, towards the later years at PSG, you saw him take that player on less and less often because he didn't maybe back himself to do it because his injuries took their toll.
I don't know if Neymar, maybe, yeah. I don't remember Neymar ever stopping to dribble past anyone he ever saw in front of him ever. But yeah,
he seemed to turn inside more in his later years because maybe he didn't think he had the.
Well, for sure. I mean, like Messi's explosivity, he kind of lost some of that at some point, and he drops slightly deeper. He still retains it, but it's just natural that certain parts of your physical play will decline. The other thing to think about is that how many minutes you play at a young age. So, like, will Yamal be? Your peak should be in your 25 years old or something when you're a winger, really, apart from not dribbling as much, perhaps. But will he have played so many minutes by that time that he doesn't benefit and get the full career out of him? Because Messi wasn't really a starter until he was 19, 20.
And you have the factor there of not just him starting this young, playing every game, being the most important player in the team, but the increasing number of games every season. So even the comparisons to past players who broke through at this age are not going to quite be accurate because he's going to end up playing 60, 70 games a year.
He might. I think Barcelona in particular probably learned from that with what happened to Pedri. But,
you'd hope so.
Well, he's back now and he's playing really well. And Pedri won the Golden Boy award because he is the Golden Boy.
He's your Golden Boy, isn't he?
Yes.
And Lamine Yamal is our Golden Boy. Well, he's their Golden Boy. But the correct answer is actually Adam Wall.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including David Ornstein, Amy Lawrence and James Horncastle. With the latest transfer news and insights on every Premier League story that matters, theathletic.com puts you inside football, and you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.